Hitler died in 1945, but the curse of his name did not. A niece shot dead under mysterious circumstances. A nephew who fought for America against his own blood. Another who died loyal in a Soviet prison. How could one family be torn apart by loyalty, betrayal, and silence? Berlin, April 1945. The city burned, the Reich crumbled, and deep beneath the ruins, Adolf Hitler pressed the trigger and vanished into smoke and fire. But while the dictator's body was reduced to ashes, his shadow lingered. A single question haunted the silence that followed. What became of the family that carried his cursed name? Few people realized that behind the face that terrorized the world, there remained brothers, sisters, nephews, nieces, ordinary souls bound by blood to history's most infamous man. Some clung to him until the very end, refusing to betray their loyalty. Others turned away, choosing exile, denial, or even open rebellion against their lineage. A few tried to erase themselves, hiding under false names to escape the burden of their identity. Yet, no matter the path they chose, their lives were consumed by the same shadow. The crimes of one man condemned an entire family, turning them into hunted figures, symbols of shame, or tragic reminders that bloodline can be as much a curse as it is a bond. From Paula, the devoted sister who died in obscurity, to William, the defiant nephew who raised arms against his own uncle. From Geli, the young woman whose death remains one of history's darkest mysteries, to Heinz, the loyal youth who perished in a Soviet camp. Each story adds a new layer to the haunting legacy of the Hitler name. This is not the tale of generals and armies. It is the tale of a family broken by blood. Are you ready to step into the shadows? She was the last surviving sister of Adolf Hitler. Her name, Paula Hitler. Born in Austria in 1896, the youngest of 6 children. By the time she reached adulthood, most of her siblings had already passed away. Only Adolf remained, and Paula. Their relationship was never close. Yet when her brother rose to power, Paula never turned her back. She lived quietly, never joining the Nazi party, never marching under the swastika. Still, her loyalty was unquestioned. She refused to condemn him. She never spoke against him. For Paula, blood was unshakable. When the Third Reich collapsed in April 1945, Paula's life changed forever. She was not a soldier, not a politician, not a criminal. But she carried the most dangerous name in Europe. To the Allies, even a sister could be a suspect. To the people of Germany, she was a reminder of the nightmare they wanted to erase. In May 1945, American soldiers advanced into Berchtesgaden, the mountain retreat of Adolf Hitler. They found Paula living nearby. She was arrested, interrogated, and brought to Munich. For weeks, the questions never stopped. What did you know of your brother's habits, his secrets, his crimes? Paula could offer little. She had lived her life in the background, surviving on modest office jobs, hiding under the alias Wolf. She had seen the power of her brother, but had never shared it. By July, she was released. But freedom did not mean peace. In post-war Austria, the name Hitler was poison. Paula sought financial aid as a victim of war, yet the state refused. She applied for jobs, only to be dismissed once her identity was discovered. Her surname was a scar that no employer wanted to bear. She lived in a small apartment in Salzburg. Alone, no husband, no children, no family left to share the burden. Only the faint support of a few unrepentant Nazi sympathizers who sent her small donations. Every day was a quiet struggle. Every night a reminder that her brother's shadow stretched longer than any prison walls. On June 1, 1960, Paula Hitler died at the age of 64. There was no fanfare, no recognition, no redemption. On her gravestone in Bergfriedhof Cemetery, one name was carved in stone: Paula Hitler. A cruel reminder that even in death, she could not escape the blood that bound her. History remembers Adolf Hitler as the architect of destruction. But Paula's life tells another story, of a woman who bore the weight of that destruction silently, helplessly, until the end. She was the sister who never betrayed her brother. And for that, she was condemned to a life of obscurity and solitude. Among Hitler's fractured bloodline, one figure stood closer than most: Angela Hitler, his half-sister, born in 1883. Unlike Paula, Angela shared more than a name. She shared a household, a proximity to Adolf's private world that few ever glimpsed. Widowed young, Angela raised 3 children alone. And when Adolf Hitler ascended into power in the late 1920s, he brought his half-sister and her family into his orbit. They lived in his Munich apartment. Later, at his grand mountain retreat in Berghof. Within those walls, Angela's daughter, Geli Raubal, would become the center of a story both intoxicating and sinister. Geli was radiant, young, spirited, and adored by many. To Hitler, she was far more than a niece. He watched her, guarded her, obsessed over her. Friends whispered that his control was suffocating. She was forbidden to leave the house without permission, forbidden from speaking freely, forbidden from pursuing love. But love found her nonetheless. Geli grew close to one of Hitler's chauffeurs, a man who treated her as an equal, not as an idol. When Hitler learned of the relationship, he reacted with fury. The driver was dismissed. Geli was locked deeper inside her gilded prison. Then, in September 1931, it happened. Geli Raubal was found dead in Hitler's Munich apartment. A bullet pierced her chest. The pistol was Hitler's. She was only 23. The news exploded across Germany. Was it suicide? A desperate young woman trapped and suffocated, taking her own life? Or was it murder? A cover-up to protect Hitler's secrets? No investigation ever reached a definitive answer. The case was closed swiftly. Too swiftly, and the questions lingered in silence. For Hitler, the loss was devastating. Witnesses recalled him collapsing into a deep depression. He withdrew from the public eye for months. To one confidant, he confessed, "She was the only woman I ever truly loved." Whether those words were confession or manipulation, history cannot decide. For Angela, the mother, the wound never healed. She left Munich, moving away from the home where her daughter's laughter had once filled the halls. Yet fate tied her again to her infamous brother. In the years that followed, she worked as the housekeeper at Berghof, serving within the very residence that had imprisoned her daughter. She lived under the same roof as Adolf, loyal yet forever scarred. Angela Hitler died in 1949. She carried her grief to the grave. And Geli's death, still unresolved, still cloaked in rumor, remains one of the darkest shadows of the Hitler family. A mother who could not protect her child, a niece who may have known too much, and a dictator whose most intimate relationship ended with the echo of a gunshot. The story of Angela and Geli was not simply tragedy. It was the black heart of a family already cursed. Long before Adolf Hitler carved his name into history, there was another Hitler moving in the shadows. His half-brother, Alois Hitler Jr., born from their father's first marriage, Alois lived a life both connected to and separate from the man who would become dictator. As a boy, Alois clashed constantly with their stern father. At 14, he ran away, drifting across Europe, taking odd jobs: waiter, hotel clerk, bartender. He sought freedom, not power. Yet freedom was fleeting, for the surname he carried would one day bind him to a legacy he could not escape. Alois eventually married an Irish woman, Bridget Dowling, in Dublin. They had a son, William Patrick. For a time, it seemed he might forge a life beyond Germany's reach. But Alois was restless. He abandoned Bridget and young William, returning to Germany, leaving his wife and child to survive alone. It was the first fracture in a story that would ripple across generations. In Berlin, Alois opened a tavern. Later, a small restaurant in Hamburg. He lived quietly, avoiding politics, steering clear of his ambitious younger brother. But when Adolf rose to power, the name Hitler became a beacon and a burden. Nazi officials eyed him with suspicion. Though blood of the Führer, Alois was not a loyalist, not a soldier, not even a party member. Rumors whispered that he was warned to keep his distance, to sever ties, to fade into obscurity. And so he did. For years, Alois lingered on the margins of history, alive but erased. When the war ended, he remained in Hamburg, living with his second wife, Hedwig Heidemann. To neighbors, he was just a quiet man, running a modest business. Few knew or dared to mention the weight of his lineage. In 1956, Alois Hitler Jr. died. No monuments, no ceremonies, no legacy to claim. His life slipped away, almost unnoticed. Yet the true mark he left was not in Germany, but in the son he abandoned. William Patrick Hitler, who would later rise in defiance against his infamous uncle. The forgotten brother had given birth to a new chapter in the family saga, one of betrayal, rebellion, and a bloodline determined to end itself. Alois Hitler Jr. is remembered not for loyalty, nor for power, but for absence, the brother who walked away, the man who left his son to confront the shadow of Adolf alone. And in that silence, his story became a mirror. A reminder that sometimes, turning your back on history does not free you from it. It only passes the burden to the next generation. He was born in Liverpool, England, in 1911, the son of Alois Hitler Jr. and an Irish mother, Bridget Dowling. His name, William Patrick Hitler. From the very beginning, his life was defined by absence. His father abandoned him and returned to Germany, leaving Bridget to raise the boy alone. William grew up with little more than a cursed surname, but that name, in time, would open doors and seal his fate. At 19, curious about the uncle he barely knew, William traveled to Germany. The year was 1930. Adolf Hitler was not yet the Führer, but already a rising star in politics. At first, the reception was warm. Adolf introduced his nephew at social events, even hinted that he might secure him positions of influence. For a moment, it seemed William had stepped into a world of opportunity, but the longer he stayed, the more uneasy he became. He saw the paranoia, the control, the iron fist with which his uncle ruled even the smallest details of daily life. William asked for favors, jobs in banks, in companies tied to the Nazi regime. But when those ambitions went unmet, cracks began to form. By the late 1930s, the relationship had soured. William demanded more. Adolf grew suspicious. The warmth between uncle and nephew froze into hostility. Soon, William returned to Britain, where he did the unthinkable. He spoke out. He gave interviews, wrote articles, and exposed the chilling nature of his uncle's rise. The press branded him the nephew who betrayed Hitler. In 1939, as war loomed, William crossed the Atlantic to America. There, he found a stage. He delivered lectures, warning of the danger his uncle posed. When the bombs began to fall, William took a step no one expected. He enlisted in the United States Navy. The nephew of Adolf Hitler now wore the uniform of America. He fought not for family, not for blood, but against it. In doing so, he became the only member of Hitler's family to take up arms against the Third Reich. After the war, William vanished from the spotlight. He changed his surname to Stuart Houston, settling quietly on Long Island. He married, raised 4 sons, and lived as an ordinary man beneath the mask of anonymity. But the shadow of his bloodline never faded. Those 4 sons made a vow. They would never have children. With them, the line of Hitler in America would end. A conscious decision to bury a name forever. William Patrick Hitler died in 1987. His grave lies silent, without fanfare, without the infamy that haunted his youth. He was the nephew who defied his uncle, the man who chose to fight against the very blood that bound him. And in doing so, he became both a traitor to his family and a soldier for the world. In every family there are contrasts, and within the Hitler bloodline, none was sharper than between 2 nephews, William Patrick, the rebel who fought against his uncle, and Heinz Hitler, the loyal youth who died in his name. Heinz was born in 1920, the son of Alois Hitler Jr. and his second wife, Hedwig Heidemann. From childhood, he grew up in Germany, immersed in the atmosphere of rising nationalism. Unlike William, who saw danger and hypocrisy in Adolf, Heinz idolized his uncle. To him, Adolf Hitler was not a tyrant. He was a hero. As a teenager, Heinz joined the Hitler Youth. By all accounts, he was exemplary, disciplined, obedient, eager to serve. Teachers and officers described him as intelligent, ambitious, fiercely devoted to the cause. In Heinz, the Nazi regime found an ideal model of its indoctrination. When war erupted, Heinz followed the path laid before him. He trained as an officer, serving in the Wehrmacht. To his comrades, he was more than just a soldier. He was the Führer's nephew, a symbol of loyalty and sacrifice. But war does not honor bloodlines. In 1942, while fighting on the Eastern Front, Heinz was captured by Soviet forces. He was only 22. At first, the Red Army had no idea of his identity. But when interrogators discovered who he was, they saw an opportunity. The Soviets pressed him with questions. They offered him a chance to denounce his uncle, to speak against the Reich, to save himself by betraying the man he worshipped. But Heinz refused. Time after time, he rejected their demands. His loyalty was absolute. For months, he endured harsh captivity, cold, hunger, endless interrogations. Still, he would not bend. He clung to his oath, to the image of his uncle as a leader worth dying for. In late 1942, Heinz Hitler died in Soviet custody. The exact circumstances remain unclear. Some accounts claim illness, others suggest mistreatment. What is certain is that he never saw freedom again. He never renounced the name that sealed his fate. He was just 22 years old. His death stands in stark opposition to William Patrick's survival. One nephew chose rebellion and lived. The other chose devotion and perished. 2 branches of the same family tree, split by ideology, both consumed by the shadow of Adolf Hitler. History often remembers William, the nephew who defied the dictator. But Heinz's story is just as revealing. It shows the depth of loyalty that the regime could inspire, a loyalty so strong it destroyed a young man before he ever had the chance to live. In Heinz Hitler, we see not power nor glory, but tragedy. A nephew who gave his life, not for his own choices, but for a man whose vision consumed the world. He was the bloodline's sacrifice, and he died in the silence of a Soviet cell. When Adolf Hitler pressed the trigger in the Berlin bunker, his reign ended. But for his family, the nightmare had only begun. His sister Paula lived and died in obscurity, shunned by a society that saw only her surname. His half-sister Angela carried to the grave the pain of losing her daughter Geli, a death still cloaked in unanswered questions. His brother Alois Jr. faded into silence, but left behind a son William Patrick, who defied the Führer and fought beneath the American flag, and Heinz, the loyal youth, perished in a Soviet cell, unbroken but forgotten. Together their stories form a mosaic of tragedy. Some chose loyalty, some chose rebellion, others simply sought escape. Yet all were condemned by the same bloodline. The crimes of one man became the burden of them all. In the decades that followed, the surviving branch of the family made a fateful choice. William's sons, living quietly in America, vowed never to have children. The Hitler line would end with them. No heirs, no legacy, a deliberate erasure of blood. History remembers Adolf Hitler as the architect of terror, the dictator who plunged the world into flames. But the fate of his family reveals another truth, that tyranny does not destroy only nations. It destroys the lives of those closest, those bound by nothing more than name and blood. The shadow of Hitler did not die in Berlin. It lingered, in prisons, in exile, in graves without peace, until the bloodline itself vanished. This was the final legacy of the Hitler family, a dynasty erased by its own curse,